Okay, as everyone continues to stream it, I'd like to welcome you to PNP Live. My name is Chelsea Lake. I'm a member of the events team at Politics and Prose Bookstore. Before we get started, okay, as everyone continues to stream it, I'd like to welcome you to.
There's an echo in here.
That was a very good effect.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. At any point during the event, you can click on the link that I'll be dropping in the chat to purchase When I Grow Up, the autobiographies of 6 Yiddish teenagers. You can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. We'll get to those questions at the end of the event. We'll try to get to everyone's, but apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. We are delighted to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. To access those captions, simply click on the live transcripts option, also at the bottom of your screen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Ken Krimstein has published cartoons in The New Yorker, Punch, The Wall Street Journal, and more. He is the author of The 3 Escapes of Hannah Arendt, which won the Bernard J. Brommel Award for Biography and Memoir, and was a finalist for the Jewish Book Award and the Chautauqua Prize, and also of Kvetch Can. Krimstein will be joined in conversation with Paul Karasik, the author of the groundbreaking book, How to Read Nancy, which he co-authored with Mark Newgarden. I now turn over the screen to you two. Welcome, and I'll see you at the end.
Thanks a lot, Chelsea. Hi, Ken. How are you?
Paul, I'm good. Very nice to see you.
Good. Now, before we get going here, where are you? Is this your studio or the basement of the bombshell?
Yes, this is depends on how you. It's either my basement or the studio, depending on how I feel at the moment. It's both.
Is this where your book was created?
This is where it was. Yes, thank you. Right, that's it. The light box. It's very neat. I've been cleaning it up for days now. But yeah, no, it's actually not truly a basement because there are small windows that let some light in.
Good. A cartoonist's life, as we both know, is filled with solitude. So it's nice to have a quiet space where
it is.
You can actually concentrate for long periods of time.
It is very nice. Thank you.
So this book, your book, When I Grow Up, The Lost Autobiographies of 6 Yiddish Teenagers, on sale at some clickable link somewhere here, has gotten a wonderful advance notice and very well received. I note that it's not in some of the publicity I've seen that it hasn't been called, although it looks like comics, right? There's panels and there's balloons and whatnot. I noticed that it's not called a graphic novel. A lot of places they're calling it a graphic narrative. Was that sort of conscious on your part not to call it a graphic novel?
I mean, when you're writing nonfiction or history, novel has connotations maybe that it's completely made up. And although history is storytelling, definitely narrative, sometimes I felt that this, this was based on a lot of research, a lot of historical research, actually almost kind of a micro history approach. So I think, I actually, Hillary Shute, I think, referred to things as graphic narrative. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way of talking about it. But, the way that the book came about, because it leans a lot into storytelling. I love comics, but, it's based on real people and real events that happen.
Well, maybe we should take a step back because I suspect that many people are not aware of the scope of what you've done here research-wise, and really essentially what this book is about, because it is nonfiction and it's not a single narrative, but it's a narrative made of 6 separate stories.
Yeah.
So give us the basic gist of what this marvelous book is about.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So I was a gag cartoonist, high calling the New Yorker, and then I did this biography of Hannah Arendt, which I wanted to get to her as a person. I wanted to use the form of pictures and words together. And then I was looking for what to do after it. And I wanted to do another nonfiction story. And I was poking at different characters and getting rejections from my publisher and so on and so forth. And it got to a crummy February Sunday morning, and I was absolutely, the only thing that was going to cure me, having moved from New York here to Evanston, nothing wrong with Evanston though, was a New York bagel or bialy. And luckily there's a store nearby that is called New York Bagel and Bialy. And so I went there, and they had a little sign up there saying, free talk this afternoon, massive discoveries, coffee and arugula will be served. So I dragged my wife over there, and this guy was talking, and he started talking about how they had discovered, this was 2018, so 3 years ago, they had discovered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of documents hidden in a basically church, abused, abandoned church in Vilnius, Lithuania. And among these documents, they were all in Yiddish, they were all hidden by Eastern European Jews from the Nazis that wanted to take it. And among these recently discovered were many autobiographies of teenagers, and they were anonymous because they were it was founded, it was an organization called YIVO, Y-I-V-O, the Yiddish Scientific Institute, and they were very progressive scholars. They studied sociology, and they wanted to make a study to determine what the future of the Yiddish-speaking people in Europe was going to be like. And to do this, they said, let's talk to the teenagers. Let's find out from the kids what's going on. Pretty interesting for the 1930s. Well, they were anonymous because they knew they weren't going to get the kids to spill the beans on their parents if they had to put their names in there. And they devised a very arcane way of getting, because they knew they wouldn't even be able to get them to do it if they didn't pay them. So they offered a grand prize of 150 zlotys, which it's the hardest research I've had to do is figure out exactly how much that really is. I think it's about, well, the best I could figure out, it could get you, you could share an apartment in Warsaw, not a very nice one, for a year on that. So it's not insignificant.
Okay, so they ran this as a contest. They wanted to find out what the youth of Jewish youth was thinking and how they were thinking about the future, and get some real stories.
Yeah.
And so they ran a contest for people to write kids to write short autobiographies, memoir pieces.
Yeah.
With the incentive of a nice fat.
Yeah, a good prize.
Prize.
Yeah. And hundreds of them came in 3 rounds over the 30s. In an incredible irony. I mean, this whole story, I mean, is just irony upon fate, upon kismet. But the day that the grand prize was to be awarded was September 1st, 1939, the very day that the Nazis invaded Poland. Vilna was part of Poland, and the works were lost. They were lost. Some were taken back to Germany. The Nazis, the minute they got into Vilnius, they went directly to YIVO to basically take all of the materials and bring them to Frankfurt for what a museum they were calling the Museum to Lost Cultures or Vanished Civilizations. Many were saved by brave librarians and hidden. So the ones that they found, a lot of the ones that they found a few years ago were the ones that had been hidden. And I went up to the man, Jonathan Brent, who was the current head of YIVO, and I said, what is going on with these? Where are these? What's happening? And he said, they're in Vilnius. And next thing I know, I'm in Vilnius, poking through the National Library there, which has beautifully preserved them. And people are helping me to translate them, and I'm getting to see the lives. I'm using these not as YIVO had intended to do some sort of very precise ethnographic research. I'm using these as artifacts of people, how they lived. And YIVO, the rules were so daring. They said, we want you to write the truth. We are not going to give any prizes for fancy writing. Don't make anything up. Don't make things seem better than they are. Write about sex, write about your parents, write about work, write about politics. And these kids delivered. I just couldn't believe it.
Hmm. So you chose out of all of these entries, contest entries, you chose 6 stories to tell. How did you choose the 6 that you tell? You've got a story that's about a daughter who's forbidden to pray at a synagogue for her dead father because that she's because of her gender. There's one about a guy who's trying to get an American visa. There's one who's just a frustrated singer. You know, you've got 6 magnificent, very varied stories by these youths. How did you choose those 6?
Yeah, well, I was working in the archives in Vilnius, and also I had little headlines of many of them, and I wanted there to be a diversity. This area that I named Yiddishuania, because that's the only commonality I could figure out between, you know, Moscow and Odessa and all these different places they spoke that language. It covered a lot of ground, so I wanted there to be, you know, an equal amount of, you know, boys and girls, men and, you know, men and women, rich and poor, urban, you know, and out in the country, you know, observant. There were some who were very observant and some who were very, very secular. And I wanted to show the diversity, modern. I wanted them to be happy, funny. And it's funny, when I started some, like that one you mentioned about the teenage girl who becomes almost a proto-feminist, you know, rebelling about the fact that she can't pray for her father, and she's actually uprated. A guy runs up and sort of yells at her and says, you know, you can't do this. Women can't do this. Your prayer isn't worth anything. This is writing in 1939. She says, what do you mean? You know, and she starts her autobiography by saying, I was the 8th daughter. So when I heard that, I said to the translator who was helping me, I said, that's got to be a comedy. I mean, 8 girls, it's going to be hilarious. You know, I just, you know, I worked a little bit of comedy into it because I just wanted to show the similarities between the way we live now, who we are. People are people, teens are teens. It's funny when you mention the folk singer and the protester and the letter writer. You know, this guy was trying to get a visa and he kept getting rejected. All these things are, you know, everything old is new again. So, you know, as I got the translations in and as I tried to form them into coherent narrative, the characters became more and more real to me as who they were. So they were biographies, sadly, of people. We know their lives, but we don't know their names. And they were teens.
And so it's so poignant that these stories of, you know, actual teenagers thinking about their past and writing about it in their present and thinking towards their future, of course, had no inkling, as no one had any inkling of what was to become of them and what was to happen to this vast expanse of Jews, 9 million Jews. That did you coin that Yiddishuania?
I did. I made it. I made it up.
That's going to be in the dictionary in a few years. It's like, I'm so shocked nobody's thought of that before. It's beautiful.
Well, you know, it's also civilization that I have some roots connected to too. I mean, I found out again. I went into this with a phrase that I read from a historian that I really, really love, Carlo Ginzburg, who, if you haven't read the Cheese and the Worms, you know, get it. It's amazing. But he said the euphoria of ignorance, and that's how I go into these things, you know. So, yeah,
I need that on a T-shirt.
Euphoria of ignorance. It's like and so I didn't know Yivo from TiVo when I went into this. I know my great grandmother. My grandmother, who I call my bubby, they spoke Yiddish only so that we couldn't understand, you know, what they were saying.
Right.
But since I did this, my mom has told me that my great grandmother, who she knew, came from Vilna. So I didn't even know that when I went over there.
Remarkable coincidence. It's this stunning coincidence that's going on here. You know, Ken, I have a feeling that maybe before we go any further, it might be useful because, you know, we're talking about some heavy duty stuff here. You know, it's the ironies and the tragedy of the entire situation. These youths who didn't get to see the futures they were imagining, and yet at the same time, you mentioned you're bringing some humor into it. There's definitely a modern sensibility, you know, that runs through this. That's your own sensibility. I think maybe it would be a good idea for the audience to get a sense of what these pages look like. If you
Sure.
do you have some samples that you could
Yeah,
share?
I do. I excerpted uh a little bit of just a wee bit here. I think I'm sharing my screen. Do you see that? Yeah.
Yep, that's good. I got it.
Okay, so these are some excerpts from a couple of the stories. This one is actually the last one that I put in. I call her the skater because I don't know her name. A 19-year-old girl.
Yeah, remember just that for this contest, the memoirists, the teenagers who were writing their stories, were advised, actually, the rule was that you weren't allowed to put your name on these.
No, you couldn't put your name in, you couldn't put your town in, you couldn't name anybody. And some of them, of course, broke the rules, but they, as I said, they had this code so they could get the money to you if you won. So I didn't know what her name was, but you know, from reading the story, and you'll see a little bit of how it goes. So I call her the skater. And I start each one with a little bit, you can see on the left, of Yiddish writing in their own hand, which I traced. And then it sort of morphs into her skating, because you'll see. And then there's a big picture of her skates getting ready to go. And you'll note I use one color in orange in this. So this starts in a more traditional comic fashion. And this comes, you know, from her words. For the past year, I've been looking after a rich woman's kids in the big city. Let me begin by saying I am prone to exaggeration. 3 weeks ago, I thought that if only my sister would send me a pair of ice skates, I would know that I was a truly lucky person. And she did. And then we see a guy delivering, you know, what we can see, what she's got X-ray specs vision, and she's saying, big package from Warsaw. And, you know, now she writes this, such warm currents are flowing through me. The flame, the fire compels me to express myself fully, to write. All week, I look forward to Friday evening, when I'm finally free to run to the rink. As I skate, the thoughts flood in. I see my adorable baby brother lying in a bed, sick, a sad smile. I'm 9, doctors crowd our house. He would have been such a splendid boy, dressed in a sharp sports coat with a crisp, wide collar. She's obsessed with fashion, this girl. I would so love to have him with me now. I never really believed in God, but at that moment I prayed, if you let him live, I will believe you. More visions rush in. So she loves to skate, and all her story comes in as she's skating. So just a little taste of the way another one goes. This one I call The Boy Who Liked a Girl. And this is also from toward the end, 20-year-old boy. Here we can see the Yiddish, his handwriting, and there's a girl. And unfortunately, our pictures are over a lot of this text. It took a long time for me to get used to listening to M talk. M is who he calls her. I'll find the page so I can read it accurately. But I finally figured out how to be both interested and not interested at the same time. I just answer one word in 10. That seemed to work. No one ever thought of that before. And amazingly, as I started to get to know her better, I started to like her. M's character was what I can only describe as noble, and she was beautiful, so beautiful. M and I often went out to the woods. Everybody hung out there. No question. M and I developed a relationship that could have become something truly important. But something happened that tore us apart and led us to forget about each other for a long, long time. So it's the story of love, of teen love. You know, I had to become a teenage boy and kind of remember what that was like. And so
well, exactly, because you're bringing yourself into these. And I thought that that was a really interesting example. So for instance, when the skater goes to the door that you just showed us, you know,
Yeah,
and there's the guy comes to the package, and like she didn't write in her original memoir, the postman came and said this.
right.
So a lot of the dialogue here you had to write.
A lot. Sometimes I punctuated the dialogue that comes out of their mouth because a lot of what they wrote was narrative. And
Right.
they might say something like, my dad made me feel better when blah, blah, blah. And I felt that, since I knew, the narrative context of what they were saying, like she said, oh, I was very, very excited to get those ice skates. I thought I'd jump out of my skin, it was the greatest thing. I could, big package from Warsaw. I mean, I'm sure she didn't have X-ray specs either. Maybe she did. Did they ever work for you, those X-ray specs, Paul, when you got them?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Did they? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
No, but I tried to make them come alive in narrative, like biographers, sometimes do. When, I mean, did we really know, what Caesar, was felt when, how he was walking or what he looked like? So,
When I originally heard the conceit of the book that you were adapting these texts that were written by these young people about their lives, I just sort of assumed that you were just going to do a straightforward adaptation. As you know, I worked on an adaptation of Paul Auster's novel City of Glass with David Mazzucchelli, and one of the things that Auster, who is a prominent American writer, said, you guys can do whatever you want to do, but you can't change a word of the text. So that's sort of a purist point of view, with hugely granted that the author himself was there to lay down the law. But in this case, you've really taken some liberties with the narrative and the narrative voice. Like there's a 21st century sound to so let's say thread. Your point of view, you're a humorist, you're a cartoonist for the New Yorker, and there's some real contemporary sounding language and situations and humor, and yet it works beautifully and harmoniously with the original text. And I'm wondering how you just was that a natural decision that you're going to take their words, but you're not going to use all of them, and you're going to take some of your words, but you're not going to use all of them either?
It's a balancing act. I mean, the main thing I wanted to do was show that there's no difference between these folks and us. People are people. It doesn't matter if they were from this culture. Teens are teens. Teenagers will make their own fun. It doesn't matter what language, what religion, and I felt that. And especially I was struck by the similarities. Like, there were cartoonists working there, and they were good. There were movies being played there. There were, I came to this with so much discovery, and this was kind of a world I didn't really know about. I mean, I kind of had the Fiddler on the Roof, Theater in the Round vision on one side. Nothing wrong with it. It's a Sholem Aleichem, a great writer, a great show. And I had the horrible images on the other side, but I didn't know about what happened in the middle. And when I started finding out, there were radio shows, they were watching American movies. I mean, I leaned into, there's been a lot of books written by, Lucy Davidovich, and, an American scholar who went there in 1939, a New Yorker. So, and I was struck by the similarities. So I was like, I wanted to show that these are kids like kids are. And a lot of their language was very, very fresh and almost to the point of being shocking. I mean, just because it was 1939 doesn't mean they were talking like, some sort of Greek figures etched of stone. I mean, look at some movies made in the 30s. I mean, it's very edgy. So, and but sometimes they had quirky phrases like, it hit me like a thunderclap, and like little 1930s-ish type phrases that my grandparents might have said. So I'd throw those in there occasionally. So it was a balancing act. But I stayed true to their arcs. I couldn't put the whole stories in because they were really complicated, but I tried to stay true to them and make them work within the arc of the entire book. It had to have a flow.
And I thought some of the writing was just extraordinarily well, like this proto-feminist one
Yeah.
that you mentioned of the girl who is really constricted by society.
Yeah, and she actually, I would get these translated. I mean, I got some in Lithuania, the librarians there helped me with the top line, like this is, and then Ellen Cassidy, who's a wonderful translator of Yiddish here. But like, even if I just look for a second, maybe this will give you a sense. This is the last 2 pages of that one, the girl who can't say Kaddish for her father, and I describe it. But she says, and these were her words, she says, but that day in shul when I tried to stand and daven or pray, for my father, there were problems. Kaiser the shamus, here, I don't know if you can see that, he runs up the stairs to the woman's balcony. What are you doing? I'm saying Kaddish for my papa. And this is what she says. You can't stand. No, you can't. Don't you know that a girl's Kaddish is worth nothing? Those were her words. And she responds in her verbatim, in her biography. At that moment, perhaps for the first time, I began not to understand God.
That's exactly the line I was thinking of.
Yeah,
I mean,
and those were her words. I didn't make that up.
Yeah, and it's so clearly that you didn't make that up.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't have made that up.
No.
And she's having this revelation in like real time.
Well, that's what I love about comics. That's what I love about graphic narrative. We experience it in real time because pictures tell stories, as do words,
Yep. And we are in control of the flow because we're able to go forward and backward, spend as much time with any image as we want to.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things, one of the many great things about it.
Yeah. And Paul, by the way, a little shout out to Paul, who knows what he's talking about. He did an entire book on one cartoon strip of Nancy.
Yeah. Talk about insane deep reading. Wait a second. Did you say that? Well, let's talk about cartoonists for a second. Did you say you did you learned about some cartoonists who worked at the time? I mean, one of the things that is so wonderful in this book, I have to say, is like the evocation of this Yiddishwania that you've created. Like, clearly you've done some research. We've got some backgrounds and some street scenes, and it's starting to smell like fried onions and schmaltz. And it's a very evocative situation here. But we get one of the things I was going to mention when you said you have the footnotes. There's lots of footnotes in here. So if maybe you don't know a phrase, you don't know what Kaddish is, you don't know what a ganef is little bits and pieces down here for the uninitiated. But you went so far as to discover there were some cartoonists working at the time? Well,
it's funny. I just knew in my kishkas there that I translate that in my intestines that there had to be, because cartoonists are everywhere, and there was a huge press, and I knew there had to be. So when I was in Vilnius, I started finding some of them, and then I talked to my friend Eddie Portnoy, who seems to know everything about everything, particularly Yiddish cartoonists.
You certainly do.
I mean, I'm going to share the screen again quickly here, but this was so I just did a quick overview today, and sharing is paused. Can you see my share or not?
Yeah, it's coming up. There's the white screen.
Okay, so yeah, there were cartoonists, some samples of random cartoons from Yiddishwania. You can see that, right, Paul?
No, it's blank screen right now.
Wait a minute. Sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. Okay, hold on just a second, people.
Sure.
It's we're working on Zoom.
Yeah, something's got to go wrong.
Something.
Was Eddie Portnoy working for?
He works at YIVO.
At the YIVO. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Let's try this again. It would be a terrible shame if that didn't work. You see my whole desktop there, my messy desktop?
Yeah, there we go. Good.
Okay.
Success.
So yeah, some samples. And I just pulled these, quick randomly from shots and
Cool.
whatnot that I had
Great.
done. I
Awesome.
mean, look at those drawings. Now that one on the left has to do with all the different kinds of Jews not liking all the other kind of Jews, which reminded me of a joke that I recently heard. There was a desert island, and there was one Jewish guy on the desert island. So they went to the desert island, and there was one palm tree, as we know, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
there were two synagogues and only one guy. And they said, wait a minute, why are there two synagogues there? And he goes, well, because this is the one I go to, and the one over there is the one I'd never go to. I wouldn't be caught dead going to. So
it reminds me of an apocryphal tale of my family with where my grandmother gave my father a couple of ties for his birthday, and she would come over a Sunday for dinner, for lunch, right? And my father came to the door so proud, he put on one of the neckties that his mother had given him for his birthday. And she looks at it and she's like, so you didn't like the other tie?
Yeah, right. Well, that's human. I mean, that's human nature. But I love the drawing. I mean, and I'm not quite sure who did it. The one on the lower right is another, just an interesting drawing. You can imagine. These two were Eddie Fine's. The one on the upper left is something about the 10 commandments for going away, over the summer. A little provocative. And
thou shalt not leave the gas on.
Yeah. And Eddie found these, and these were from the time. These are a little more political. This one on the left, I'm sorry, it's a little bit rough looking, but it almost looks like that fantastic German illustrator, cartoonist type guy, and or there's almost a little bit of Bill Malden or something. And the one on the right that's Hitler, before we even in 1932. They were very aware in 32 that Hitler was going to be a big, big problem over there. And these are political cartoons. This was an illustrator, and he did caricatures and he did sketches, and it's very New Yorker-y to me, again, in the 30s, 29, 30. So there's some great work going on. And this was actually in one of the autobiographies. A young girl did this. And I wanted to use it, but I didn't end up using her biography. I had more translated than I could. But, as a cartoonist, look under the finger there. It looks like she's actually whited it out. And the people there told me it was quite interesting that the writing in the little book that she's doing is Hebrew, but the writing on the top is Yiddish. And these little nuances of what languages that were being spoken and stuff like that were also hugely important. But I looked at this drawing of this young girl and I thought, wow, that she could have been quite a cartoonist, That's pretty interesting.
Wonderful.
So yeah, there was a lot there.
That's so great. I was wondering if could you bring back the first slideshow that you?
Sure. I think. Let's see. What did I do with it? Oh, okay. I can, I'm sure. Talk amongst yourselves.
But I would like to talk about your influences and just since we're talking about cartooning and cartoonists.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. Don't bother bringing it up. It's just there's one drawing there of the young man. I think it's the young man in love. It really makes me think of Jules Feiffer's drawing. I know he was hugely influential for me as growing up as a cartoonist and reading his work. I'm wondering what some of your influences might have been, and whether I don't know, maybe Pfeiffer figures into that, maybe not.
How could he not, really? It's funny, people have mentioned, here you are looking at my messy screen. I'll pull up the scraps part. Are you guys still, because I can go through that, but I'll talk about
yeah,
it's fun. There's a lot. I don't have it here. I go to, there's a wonderful, nothing against politics and prose, but there's a wonderful comics store here in Chicago called Quimby's. And sometimes I'll go in there and they'll have like, cartoonists from Belgium or, places that I'm not even aware of. And I think I think her name is Julie Doucet or something like that.
Doucet, yep.
Yeah, terrific,
Great.
and I was inspired by the multimedia of her stuff, by the looseness and tightness and the way that it would flow from one form into another. I was pretty inspired by that.
It's great.
And I would say, Paul Karasik is a major influence on me.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, I don't know if you can. Oh, you can't probably. I mean, these classics illustrateds from when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
That they told nonfiction stories. But I look. My father was a watercolor painter, and I wanted to use some watercolor in this. I wanted to use. I didn't want to use digital. I wanted to let the paper get wet, so I ended up using vellum. But here, maybe if you don't mind, since I've made the slide, can I go through this? This is
please do, of course.
Scraps and stuff. I'll go through it fast.
Oh, cool. Great. No, this is great. This is great.
So here I am working.
Talk. I love it.
I had this retouched to make it look like I'm left-handed. No, I'm actually left-handed.
So
this is how they look.
Wait a second. Some people just, can we go back to that page? Because there's the cartoonist's best friend, the old school cartoonist's best friend is the light box.
Love it. The best. This is all on top of it. Something about drawing, even if you're doing it on heavy paper. There you go. Yeah.
That's
magic.
Yeah.
So I'm using the light box. This is how the actual ones looked. And, I write in the beginning, blood red. I mean, you can see the miracle of this. Look at how rusted those staples are. And look at how crisp the text is. It gives you a sense of, these things were lying around for 80 years in a basement of a church or in pipe organ.
Well, being a cartoonist, we always kvetch about the paper and ink not being what it once was.
Well, look at every person's handwriting. Look at the styling of the header on that one on the left.
Beautiful.
There are some of the actual books, just sitting on the desk.
Wow.
And this was interesting. Someone tried to get fancy with his writing. So I really fell into the writing. I love the way you can see the stamp on the upper left, and I actually reproduced that in some of mine.
That's right. And you use pretty much for all the opening pages of each chapter, each section.
Yeah.
You use a page from the original.
Which I re-sketched over. I mean, I interpreted it, but I've actually had Yiddish.
Which is perfect, because this is really an interpretation, a reinterpretation.
Right. So there you can see in Lithuania, the librarians were helping me, and those, I didn't end up using a couple of those. And then you can see I took the original one, and it says Warsaw, 1937, and I redrew it on the left in my own hand to kind of give it the feel, because this book had like kind of crumbly paper on it. So then I had to go find Vilna. I mean, one of the things that I also do when I do these things is I got to go to the place, because I got to see how the light is, and I got to see how it smells and all that stuff. So I got old maps. Wonderful. And I walked on the streets.
Wonderful, Ken.
And then I even saw some old Yiddish writing. And here, Ilya Lempert was showing us around. That's my wife's finger showing. He said, see that building in the back? This is the same street. Now it's been turned into some sort of fancy pub. And so I did a painting of this street, which I include in the book.
That's right.
Black and white.
In the background, yeah.
Right.
I remember this.
And that's how it was. And this actually is that same street looking the other direction before the war. And that giant triangular thing on the right was the massive synagogue. And there's of what it looked like on the inside. And actually the Nazis didn't destroy it. The Russians did.
Of course.
And there's my wife, Alex. And we went on a tour, and the guy actually, so you can see they're excavating the floor of what was that synagogue, which was the most massive, beautiful synagogue. And the Soviets put a kindergarten over it, but they closed the kindergarten down. But I thought I might use it in the book. I never ended up using it, but I did a painting of it because I thought it might be interesting. And there's like a thing to go to the bomb shelter. And I also was poking around, and there were still buildings that were like from the war. And, of course, I just went in them, hoping I wouldn't get in trouble.
Or fall to your death.
Yeah. So then I had to try and find their faces. And these were some pictures of them in the day.
Ah,
So all the resource material, there's only one character in the book that we know what happened to. That's
let's hold off on that
we'll
story.
hold off on that. But these were just pictures of the schools and the students. And then I started zeroing in on some of the people that I thought would be good for the various stories,
Yeah.
who seemed to work.
Mhm.
On the left there, that is actually my great aunt. And she was not in Vilna. She was in Chicago, but she was of the hairstyle and that time. These pictures on the right were from some films. So these were all people of the time. So this is what I tried to do. And there's the person we were going to talk about. We can come back to that if you want. Oh, that's it.
Yeah,
Oh,
great.
no. Well, this is, you can see here, I kept redrawing the characters over and over and over again to kind of turn them into characters in my mind. And I wanted to get to the point where I could draw them. I remember I once had Mort Walker once signed, I met him at a thing and he signed a Beetle Bailey thing for me. And I think he could have done it with his eyes closed, standing on his head, you know, with his foot. I mean, he'd done it so many times. So I wanted to get so familiar with these characters that I could draw them, you know, fairly quickly. So that was sort of the practice.
Ken, I see we've got some questions coming up, and I want to leave enough time to do a little bit of Q&A. So if you do have questions, y'all, put them down, not in the chat, please, but down there in the Q&A in the bottom of the Zoom screen. So yeah, there's this one surprise story. You know, all of these five anecdotes and memoirs are anonymous because they were instructed to enter this contest, write about your life, but don't put your name on it. But one of the entrants did put their name on it. And I think maybe, since we're pressed for time, let's leave that open, because I found it one of the most wonderful surprises in this book, and how you laid this story out becomes sort of a second ending to the entire book. And it's a wonderful treat. So I just want to encourage people to, we're going to leave that a little mysterious right now, but there is an identified subject in this book. And you've got something to look forward to through this beautifully structured book. So I guess, you know, one thing, maybe some people are tuning in here because, you know, we both have had work in the New Yorker. And maybe they just don't, you know, oh yeah, Ken Krimstein is the New Yorker cartoonist, but like, this is really something different. And I'm wondering how one, before we go to the Q&A, how is one type of cartooning informing your graphic novel? How's the New Yorker sort of gag cartooning informing your graphic novel work, or vice versa? Or are they really two different parts of your brain?
No, I think they're both the same. I think it's just that the New Yorker cartoons are very compressed. Obviously, they tend to be one panel, but you know, there needs to be a tension between the visual and the words. Even if there's no words, the picture has to have a tension in it, and that elevates it and that pulls the reader in. You don't just want to illustrate the story. You know, I think we know the difference, you know, as cartoonists, between doing something that is an illustration and something that's a gag. You know, it's that 1 + 1 = 3. So often in revision, I would say, like, I'm telling the story too flat. You know, it's too on the nose. How can I make the words complement the pictures more? And I also think, you know, my style is kind of there. I like doing the washes. You know, I remember on the last book, I used green, you know, as the wash color.
Yeah.
And somebody said, green, are you crazy? Who can use green? I'm like, well, I'm used to using black and white, you know, gray. So, you know, I just thought of it as a hue. But yeah, I mean, I think they do. And I have to say, New Yorker gag cartooning, I mean, I love it all. I mean, Mad Magazine, you know, Jack Davis, you know, bring it on. To me, it's all one glorious stew.
Well, this has been really great talking to you. We could really go on.
Oh, I think so.
I know we're just sort of scratching the surface on how wonderful this book, but you know, this is we're being very casual here and enjoying the humor and talking about gag cartoons. But I really do want to underline the how struck I was, and now it's getting sort of personal here, in reading this book, and how surprised I was by how moving it was ultimately, that these nameless teenagers who, were just trying to win a contest and describe their work, their world, and with no sense of what the future was going to bring. As far as we know, most of them were annihilated,
Yeah.
as were their families, certainly. And
Well,
yet their stories here have been rescued and revitalized here in the 21st century. And
well,
it's
I'm
just,
glad. Let me
kind
just,
of a beautiful.
yeah, let me just comment on that, because I'm glad you brought it up, because, it's, I had to make a wall in my head between my knowledge
Mm,
of what happened and
mm,
them, because they
mm,
didn't know. So I
mm,
had to say, I couldn't cross that barrier.
mm,
And I read somewhere that history is what happens on a Thursday afternoon when you're
mm.
not paying attention. And, I was just trying to, I couldn't even approach dealing with the horror afterward. But I felt maybe by doing this, I could show that valuable people, lives, teens, humans, I don't care what culture, the waste, knowing where we are. So the reader is actually a kind of a character in the book, because we have knowledge that they don't have. Maybe, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
I agree. I agree. That's part of the pleasure of the bittersweet pleasure of the engagement of the book, is that you're giving us this perspective based on these actual texts. I'm looking quickly over here. Wait a second. Can we just pause for a second?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm looking at the clicking clock, but I think maybe if we just have a moment to reflect on what you just said there, because these people were killed and their
Yeah.
families were killed.
And we don't know their names. It's a terrible thing. It's a hard thing for me to grapple with.
One of the questions here, Ken, is how has doing this book influenced you see yourself as a Jew?
I can't deny it. I mean, I never could. I mean, I never really thought about it that much in the past. I mean, I was lucky to grow up in a very accepting, pluralistic community. I thought I was Irish half of my life because my friend Brian Tracy, but it has really connected me, and I fall into rabbit holes. I mean, I felt when I read Hannah Arendt,
Mm.
I didn't know anything about a lot of that stuff, and I joke at reading her is like the old ads they used to have on the New York subway for the Roach Motel. I don't know if you remember it, but you check in, but you never check out. And I feel like that happened with Hannah, and I feel like with this, I feel like the richness of this culture and this civilization. I just it's filling me up, and yes, it has heightened an appreciation of an identity that I may not have been that aware of.
It's interesting that the stories that you chose here, you have some sort of more secular Jews, and then you've got this kid who's being, sort of brought into the ascetic life. It's all sorts of the realm, the spectrum of Jewishness in this Yiddishowania. How did you, this is another question here though, how did you choose these 6 stories? Like, you mentioned it earlier, were you really just trying to find,
Well, yeah, and I wanted them to be, Paul, they had to have a visual component. Some of them were much more internal. There was one that I absolutely love, had to cut it. And from the book, it was 120 pages long, and I already whittled it down. Maybe someday it could be its own book. And I wanted to be able to fall in love with the characters and understand them. You know, I wanted their arc to be something that was universal, you know. And it's funny, it built in an interesting way. Originally, I was going to have that interesting story at the end, and I ended up planting it in the middle because it needed to be the centerpiece, and it ended sort of on love. You know, it was interesting. I didn't even really, there was like, I was kind of feeling it, you know, and it kind of went from like politics and religion to emotion and love. It was interesting. With all due respect to politics and prose there.
There's a couple of questions about admiring your the cover here is great. That's my sister. She likes your cover. Good.
Thank you.
She likes the burning red, but like I think people are curious about this orange choice and the specific fonts that you choose, because there's a variety of different lettering styles, and then you've got this orange. How did you just fall into that?
You know, I think the orange, you know, part of it was I used green for henna, and orange is nice because it can go into skin tone, and it can also be fiery for the sky. And I felt like it's more of an emotional, this was, you know, the Hannah book was a little more sort of intellectual in a way, or maybe more of a precise history. And this, I really wanted to delve into, you know, I learned a lot of things from Hannah Arendt. And one quote that I really kept with her is, storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And I really wanted these to be stories that had meaning and truth, and the color had life in it, so I could animate the people, but I could make them look embarrassed. And it had fear, like the skies could look stormy and bloody. So yeah, the fonts, I don't know. I don't know about the fonts. I mean, I think sometimes I have fun, you know, Paul, it's like, I love all the different forms. Like I got a huge page and I'm riffing on that, you know, "We want you" poster. And it says, "I don't want you," because this kid had been rejected 5 times by the State Department, maybe 6. Washington.
He wanted an American visa, this kid.
Yeah, he wrote to FDR.
Letters. Yeah,
he actually wrote to FDR and heard back. But then sometimes I love the pages that are like, you know, the classic cartoon page where it's like heavy text in the narration box, and you know, because I love every frame, I love every page. So you know, I just played with it that way.
To go back to the Hannah book, a question from our friend Jonathan Plotkin about how your research and ultimate work on the 3 escapes informed your approach to this book.
Well, it was great. I mean, it taught me how to, you know, look at a lot, I mean, you know, I subscribe to academia.com or, you know, one of those things. I mean, and I tell you, if you're trying to do research these days, it's invaluable. I must have read through 40 or 50 academic articles, and they're brilliant. Paul, maybe, you know, we know about those, and that people write amazing things. So I got familiar with that. I got familiar with using archives. I got familiar with looking at triangulating history. You know, when you read a lot of different stories, and you kind of have to figure out what's really happening between them all, because, you know, 5 historians, you'll hear 5 different versions of the same thing sometimes. So it really helped.
I'd like to encourage people to ask some more questions here. These questions have been wonderful, and we got a few more minutes. Do you have any plans for the next project?
I do.
I remember I met the first time I had a conversation with Jules Pfeiffer. One of the things he instructed me, he said, "Well, what are you working on next?" You know, I was 20 something years old. And I said, well, I kind of mumbled, and, you know, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next. And he shook his finger and he said, "Always know what your next project is going to be."
Wow. Well, you know, first of all, let me just say, I am honored to be invoked, at my name to be invoked with Jules Pfeiffer, because Jules Pfeiffer, not only, I mean, I have, you know, his collections of the things he did in The Voice, which were just, Lenny Bruce meets Mort Saul, meets, Norman Mailer meets who knows what. Then he goes and he writes Carnal Knowledge, and or he writes that one Little Murders, and he writes, what is going on? So I'm honored. He used to live down the street on West End Avenue. But I do have something in the that I'm working on, and I like to do that. It's so I've, for some reason, and this is going to maybe be a trilogy. Maybe I'll get this out of my system, but I've become like a big fan of Mittel Europe. Maybe I like the beer. So I'm doing a thing about the year when Albert Einstein and Franz Kafka, of all people, rubbed shoulders in Prague, when they were both kind of not really, they were just sort of like normal. Einstein had done some stuff, but they weren't themselves yet. They were still young, and they hung out, or they were in the same crowd in Prague.
What year was that?
1911 and 1912. And it's a fascinating story of.
Wow, this is amazing. I'd like to be a cockroach on the wall for that conversation.
Yes. Well, you might metamorphosize into that if you're not careful.
Just speaking of that, though, here Laura Smith asks, tell us about your trip to Vilna. What remained? What impressed you?
Gosh, so much. The thing that I remember was flying in and looking at the earth and thinking, oh my God, I'm deep, deep, deep in Eastern Europe. I'm deep in the Pales. I couldn't believe it. The city is beautiful. It's a UNESCO heritage site. The ghetto, a lot of the stuff is very, very well preserved. You'd be surprised. You could see there were buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched. It's a wonderful modern city. I think Lithuania, as a country, is a very progressive. I met a lot of people who were like involved in culture. I think the poets, and it's just the saddest, to go out of the town to this Ponary it's like the saddest thing you could ever imagine. It's glorious and tragic at the same time. It really is. It's a beautiful city, actually.
Did you have any good meals?
I did. Couldn't miss, and I met some lovely people, and I had some incredible, no, it's a very progressive city. I really liked it a lot. Yeah. I stayed in an Airbnb for like 3 weeks. It was great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're getting to the end of our time here, but John Caldwell has a question.
Sure.
As you immersed yourself in this vibrant world that existed almost 100 years ago, what's the biggest takeaway, parallel lesson for today that you came away with? It's a big question.
It is a big question. Well, there's a couple. People are creative. People want to solve problems across borders. People are different, but this civilization that I call Yiddishwania was vibrant, creative, forward-looking, and there's no and the Lithuanian people who helped them. We've got to cross. We got to get across these ridiculous barriers that we have. The resources that we have as human beings cannot be squandered. You cannot squander them. It's too valuable. No matter what religion you are.
Thank you, Ken. The book is When I Grow Up. You can order it some clickable something somewhere, right, Chelsea? There's a click someplace to do this from Politics and Prose, which is, if you're not aware of Politics and Prose, one of the top 5 bookstores in North America, independently owned and run, and a really, really great place. They've got a great graphic novel section, a bunch of wonderful people there too, and you can get a cup of coffee. So,
oh, fantastic.
Wonderful book. Thank you so much, Ken. This has really been
thank
fun
you.
to talk to you, man.
Thank you, and thanks to Politics and Prose. Thank you, everybody. It's been a delight.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, everybody out there, for spending this fascinating hour with us. Yes, The book link is in the chat. It'll take you to the Politics and Prose website, where after purchasing the book, you can check out our events page. We'd love to see you at another event soon. But in the meantime, again, thank you both. What a great conversation. And to everyone out there, stay well and stay well read.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.